I'd like to welcome everyone this morning.
That's right.
My name is Michelle Leering, and I'm one of the members of the organizing committee for this Justice Innovation event, and I'm delighted to have as many of you here in the room as we do. When we started planning for this event a few months ago, we hoped that we might have 25 people. So I think we've got, is that a 300% increase in what we were expecting? So it's going to be a lively day with lots of information, and we're just, and again, absolutely delighted to have you all here. So a few preliminary things. One, just take note of this little piece of information that I got up on the PowerPoint, and that's from a literature review that was done about the role of public librarians in public legal education in Canada, and note the date. So in case anybody's having difficulty reading it, it's Meg Richeson, and our keynote speaker Janet Freeman is going to tell you a bit more about Meg's work. But one of the things that she said, I believe that librarians are one missing link in the chain, the network, which will someday make legal information readily available and understandable to all Canadians. So it's feeling a little bit like Back to the Future at the moment with this particular topic. It is so interesting. I mean, that is a long time ago to have had that kind of vision for what was possible. And Janet will say more about that. Let me just tell you a little bit about the organizing committee, and maybe just so people, if they could, I didn't warn you about this, but if you could just stand. So, well, there's me. And then there's Samantha, who's from the legal clinic that I work at, and Ingrid.
Stand up. Come on. Here we are. We'll do it together.
You're going to see them later because they're going to tell you a bit about the project. And Julie's not just yet here, but Michelle Kadar, are you in the room? There you are. Good. And Kathy Manners, who's our facilitator, who she and I are part of the Rural Boldness Project. And Sabrina. There's Sabrina at the back, who's been doing an incredible job of all the logistical organizing in this incredible space. So that has been a wonderful thing. This particular event is sponsored a combination of Legal Aid Ontario funds and Law Foundation of Ontario funds. Now, how many people do this Twitter thing? Like, okay, so Twitter, like Sabrina wants us to Twitter, and hopefully back at the office they're going to Twitter on. So there's the Twitter information, and when this slide disappears, know that it's also on your agenda that you've got in your registration kit. So that's how to Twitter. And if you need to use the wireless internet here, there it is for you with the instructions also on your agenda. Okay, so you've got a detailed agenda in your registration package in case you like to know what's going on at exactly what moment. I can guarantee you that we'll probably always be running a few minutes behind. I should have planned for that more strategically than I did because we're starting a few minutes late. And we'll be moving rooms at different points in the day, but we'll tell you about that because not everything will happen in this room, but the morning will happen in this room. Sabrina, lunch is happening over there, right? And then we're back here after lunch for some instructions I'll go through in a minute. And then we'll be doing work in 2 rooms downstairs in the afternoon and coming back up here. And welcome, Julie. I see you at the back. Great. So special roles today. So we've got our facilitator, our key facilitator, Kathy. Do you want to just stand up from Social Projects Studio?
I was Twittering.
And the Rural Boldness Project. And Kathy, you were going to take a peek at that map and tell us a little something.
I did. So if you haven't had a chance to come to the map yet, the most important thing is the north is at the bottom of the map. We haven't lost you. I know that was a concern when you looked at it. Looks like the map of Ontario ends here. And that's important to me because I live up here too. I live in Orillia, so the north is important to me. So anyway, if you're from the north, down here, a key spot. Lots of good comments. What we want you to put, make sure you put your name on there. We want you to put what your hopes for the day are. So things like, right now we've got, you want lots of ideas, you want time to collaborate, you want time for learning, so that's all built into the agenda. And then somebody wants a very simple process for the day, which I can't guarantee. We're going to be doing some stuff in the afternoon where there's not going to be an agenda. So you just got to have faith that it's going to be a great afternoon of good conversation. So that's the kind of things we've got so far. And then when you get a break, we're going to actually make you connect on the map also. So you'll see one line already exists of people who you might know or not know, but you want to connect with. So we'll use the map later on for that too. So
And I want to just double check it at the beginning. That does everybody in the room know what community legal clinics are in Ontario? Yes, put up your hands if you know what legal clinics are. Oh, okay, so there's 77 of us, and we're geographically based, and we're the specialty clinics. Julie's clinic, Clio, is an example of a specialty clinic, and I'm from a geographically based clinic in Ontario, and in Eastern Ontario, and our mandate is poverty law. Okay, so that's good. Oh, and we have a note taker too. Christina, where are you? Christina's taking notes, thankfully. She works at Clio, and she's kindly agreed to take notes for the day. And Frank is our videographer, and if there's, which is a wonderful thing, and if there's anyone who would prefer not to be videographed, or whatever it's called, if you could just let Frank know, and he'll delete your image or not get you on his film. So I think that's what we need there. Okay, so who's in the room? All right, so now this is a stand-up activity. Hopefully that's okay. So what about, and I'm going to do it in a different order than it's on here just to keep you all confused. So who is a librarian? Okay, and now we're going to talk about public librarians. Which one of you are public librarians? Okay, and courthouse librarians and library managers, great. Law school libraries? Great. There's another one or two. There's another one or two registered, so hopefully they'll come. A government library. There you are. I know you're there. And I think we had some people coming from the Supreme Court of Canada too. There you are. Wonderful. Good to meet you. And who's involved with the Law Society here? Oh, trick question. There you go. And who's a lawyer in the room? Who's a paralegal? Interesting. All right, who works for a plea organization? Public legal education organization. Who considers themselves a social justice activist? That's a fair number, good. Law students, any law students in the room? I know there's at least one registered, so. And master's in library student. There you are, wonderful. And where are you from? A rural, remote area of Ontario, perhaps? Yes, wonderful. And are there any funders in the room? Which include Legal Aid and Law Foundation, I guess? Yeah, great. Legal Aid Ontario staff. Wonderful. And Community Legal Clinic staff. All right. And is there anyone, the description that I've given doesn't match you? Some category you fall in. Did I miss any category?
Student Legal Clinic.
Student Legal Clinic. Doug, how could I do that? Can you believe that? I can't. All right. Sorry about that, Doug. I meant to have you on there. All right. Next piece. What is this access to justice business? Well, you would have seen this if you had a chance to look at the report that we wrote about the little prototype we developed in Hastings, Prince Edward, Lennox, and Addington. And it's important to credit where this little quote comes from about access to justice. There's many definitions. It's a contested concept, access to justice. But this is from the Law Foundation's report, Connecting Across Language and Distance. And if you have never had a chance to read that, you can Google it. I commend it to you. It really was a seminal report for getting us focused on meeting the needs of people in rural and remote areas and understanding what the challenges were that they were facing. And it was pulled together by two incredibly wonderful facilitators and researchers, Karen Cole and George Thompson. So they're talking about access to justice in this context for people in rural and remote areas, information so you can understand legal problem and identify next steps, and know how to access legal practitioners. So they very much had a vision of a system of people who were helping people who were vulnerable. And I just wanted to read a couple of things that have been meaningful for me in my little time doing this kind of work. So poor people are not just like rich people without money. Poor people do not have legal problems like those of private plaintiffs. Poverty creates an abrasive interface with society. Poor people are always bumping into sharp legal things. And for those of us who work in community legal clinics, it's sort of our modus operandi, kind of understanding that and how true that is. And it's what motivates us to have more access points to information and more people caring about this issue. And this issue, of course, is particularly acute outside major urban areas that often have more resources to help people. All right. So this next little bit of information is to give you what was promised in the invitation, and that was a little bit of information about rural and remote issues in particular. So the Canadian Forum on Civil Justice is just finishing up a literature review for us on the situation and on possible new approaches. And I'm just going to focus on things, it's a very long report, that are relevant to this issue of access to justice. So they just finished a national legal needs study, and it tells us what you read there. So approximately 50% of adult Canadians will have a legal problem once every 3 years, which basically means all of us over the course of a lifetime. The top kind of problems that people have are consumer law and debt problems and employment problems, and these are followed closely by neighbor and family problems. The interesting thing again is that it's not evenly distributed, so people who are poor or low income actually suffer more legal problems because they are more vulnerable and they're actually less likely to do anything about them. So this is not just research in Canada now, this is research around the world informing this. And we know that the lower your income, and if you belong to particular social economic groups, you're going to be worse off. And there's this idea now of clusters of legal problems. So one thing happens, and it's a domino effect, right? So you've got the job loss, and then there goes the marriage, and then you lost the shelter, and so on, and income security, and everything else, as examples. And there's just lots of examples of triggers. Anyway, family breakdowns, and another one. So rural and remote communities are understood to have populations that disproportionately are affected by everyday kinds of legal problems because there's more poverty, lower incomes, older populations, and less access. So this is another interesting thing, this little piece. Probably most of us thought a legal problem was something you went to court about, but clearly that's not what is happening in Canada right now. So, and I think this is shocking for lawyers to see. What do you mean only 6.7% of people actually go to law, like go to the formal justice system for help with their problem? But this is what the Canadian Forum's most recent survey found. And you can see from the other statistics there that people really are, by the bottom one, they're going to family and friends for advice, and I would add into that, because many librarians are friends, we've discovered through our research, of people in the community, especially in rural and remote areas. They're go-to people. That's who they go to. People in the community go to you for help because they're used to you helping them. So people clearly are not actually going for legal advice to lawyers, and they're going elsewhere. So that's an important thing to know about this. So this is just to tell you that there have been two big national reports. One is the one Justice Cromwell's report, so that's the Supreme Court of Canada. Justice, he led this access to civil and family justice big review describing access to justice as a very serious problem. And the Canadian Bar Association has also written an incredible report and had quite a consultation process describing the problem as abysmal. And everybody is saying we need a fresh approach. So that's one of the reasons why we're having this day. Between the Connecting Across Languages and Distance report and the need to sort of narrow the justice gap for people in rural and remote areas, there is just a sense that we have to take a systems approach to this problem. Here's a few more stats about rural areas from the Canadian Forum's report. So 20% of Canadians live in rural and remote areas. The distance that they live from an urban area does affect their access. And although their legal problems are often quite a lot the same as urban areas, but I'll say not completely, but we can talk about that another time. They have all kinds of problems: transportation, childcare, high cost of services, lack of services, and all that sort of thing. These are, again, more of a description of the digital divide is another thing that's been identified and talked about in that report. That report will be out in a couple of weeks. And here are 3 of the 6 areas of promising practices that they've identified, and they apply to our concern here today. So we need more collaboration between service providers and trusted intermediaries, very similar to what the Connecting Across Languages and Distance report said. We need to look at communications technology to overcome distance barriers, and I know at least one person in this room, Doug, has an idea about that. And we need to promote legal information and legal awareness, and lots of ideas about how to do that. So very on point with today's event. So I was asked to describe the problem succinctly, and I'm not a person who likes to focus on problems. I'd rather look at opportunities, but anyway, we'll just say it out starkly. This is what we understand the problem to be, and some of you may have other ideas to add into this who are from rural and remote areas. But anyway, They've got special challenges because they may not, I think very polite saying may not, it's probably they do not, but anyway, they may not have a computer or a printer, and the printer piece is really important. They may not have reliable internet access, so all that stuff about, you know, province-wide broadband, don't believe it. Those of us who live in rural and remote areas know that for a fact. They may not identify their problem as legal. Hence, we have tools like this coming out. So there's a legal health checkup pilot project in Halton. I think someone is here from the Halton area. There's this kind of legal awareness approach that we're beginning to foster to help people kind of be able to red flag that problems have a legal issue. It's particularly acute in poverty law areas around income security and employment, that people don't understand their rights. A little less problematic in criminal and family, where it's obvious to people that problems have a legal connotation. They may not take action without information. In fact, they probably won't take action without information. And they don't know how to identify credible and accurate legal information. That's been a big issue, especially online. Very confusing for people now, right? Different jurisdictions and so on. Fewer local lawyers and paralegals, and perceived high cost of legal help. So what's the opportunity, which is what I prefer to talk about? People in your community need new access points to legal information about common legal problems. And what's the challenge? This was on your invitation, so it's nothing new, new to you here. And that, we'll come back to the challenge again. But right now, we're instead going to hear from Chris Bentley, who's going to bring us a few inspiring words. On your agenda is listed Chris's CV, which is always incredibly understated for what he's done in his life. And we'll just mention key things that are, I think, relevant particularly to people in this room right now. And that is that you're a former Attorney General who had a big vision on access to justice issues, particularly in family law. He is the mover and shaker behind Ryerson's new Legal Innovation Zone that is doing things that will startle you and disrupt our ideas about legal practice and legal services and access to justice. And he's also the ED of the Legal Practice Program, which is a pilot program to change how we think and operate articling placements for law students. Is there something else I should add, Chris, before you start?
More than enough. Thank you very much.
Okay, all right. Well, I welcome you. And guess what? You're a catalyst for justice this morning.
I see that.
Yes, good.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
First of all, do I need to stand behind that for recording purposes?
Yeah, because the videographer wants this and the room wants that.
The room wants that too. Okay. Thank you very much, Michelle, and thank you for all of those people who have come together to put this great day together. Really, there's something magical about this moment, and it starts with who you put in the room. You put in the room people that the public trust. You put in the room people who go beyond the four corners of their offices to reach out to people who have difficulty reaching in. You understand people in the way that many, if not most, lawyers have challenges to understand people. So this is a magical moment. And Michelle said wonderful things about me, and that's very nice. But for a long time, you and those you represent have been furthering access to justice. And I want to thank you for the work that you've been doing. Early on, I was part of a group that helped set up a legal clinic in London, and I know and appreciate how important the work that you do through your legal clinics is. Often underappreciated, but enormously important. And yes, Doug, I include in that the student legal clinics that are across the province. Often underappreciated, but starting to be recognized for the great work that is done. Those, of course, in the courthouse libraries, well, I was in there many times in London, and they have a brand new space there in Middlesex Courthouse. But thank you for the work that you do. And again, lawyers in busy practices rushing in, instantly wanting information, expecting things to be there. Maybe not always the most appreciative at the moment. but we do recognize and support the great work that you do. And those in the public libraries, gosh, it's great to have you in this room. It's great to have you in this room. You represent a space really underappreciated in terms of funding, I know. Really important to people in our communities. You see all people in there. The people with no money, the people with lots of money. They come to you because they know they can find what they need and get advice from you about where to find things. You all represent safe spaces, accessible spaces, spaces that by definition reach out into the community. So today, if I had a vision for today, just my own little vision, it would be rely on everything you know and share it with those around, and you will quickly find points of intersection that will advance the access to justice need greatly. Access to justice is a word that we've been using forever. We started using it long before I became a lawyer. But when I became a lawyer, 1981 I was called, we used it in terms of people who didn't have any money or were otherwise marginalized in the legal community. It now means so much more. People with a significant amount of money have difficulty accessing the power and the strength of our legal system in the province of Ontario. And lawyers in the legal profession have pretty much been in charge of it for decades. So we've talked about it, and we've studied it, and we've reported on it. But we're still talking about it. And in the course of our conversation, we have created a mystique around access to justice. It's something, well, unusual. It's something difficult. It's something challenging. So I suspect that if you rely on what you know, much of the mystique comes out of that instantly. What are we talking about? Helping people understand what their issue is. Helping people understand what their rights and responsibilities might be. And connecting people with the appropriate and reliable resource. And not doing any of that in the language of the expert, but in the language of the recipient of the information. There's a lot of information out there. A lot of information out there. The challenge is, what is reliable? What is the recipient going to understand? And how can I connect the recipient up with the necessary person, place, institution? It's really a relatively simple roadmap. You have the opportunity to make more of that happen. That is the greatest need we have right now. It's not just that people come in, it's reaching out. So I would encourage you over the course of the day to make sure that everybody in this room knows what you do. Everybody in this room knows the people that you see on a regular basis, and that you know what the other has to offer. And I suspect you will quickly come together on some key groups of people you can help and some key messages you can help with. The sharing will be very powerful. This is a time in the access to justice conversation where we're looking for leaders. We're looking for people who will take a step. As I say, we have studied, we've reported, we've spoken, and we've called it a crisis more times than one cares to comment on. But you can't call things a crisis forever and not act. So take a step. Whatever you do at the end of the day, do something. Take one step. And don't worry about somebody else complaining about it. Take 2 steps. Be bold, be definite, and rely on what you know, because you're right. Thank you again so much for what you're doing. I'm really excited, Michelle, to see what comes out of this. I am so excited. I can hardly contain myself, but I'm going to because you have a full day. Thank you all, and I look forward to seeing the results.
Thank you so much, Chris, for those remarks. So very, very helpful. I'm just now going to review the agenda, and then in just after I do that, Kathy's going to tell you about our first activity that we're going to do, the personal passion activity. But I'm going to also introduce Disa, who is our graphic facilitator over there. You probably wonder what she's doing. What are you doing over there, Disa?
I'm writing down a summary board of what's going to happen today, so at the end of the day you'll have one kind of image that captures all your conversation.
Great, so we're going to review that. Julie and I are going to be reviewing that at the end of the day, and people are welcome to check in with that during the day. As things happen in the afternoon, Disa's going to be gathering up ideas and images and bringing them back up here to put on this graphic piece. So just to let you know a little bit, I know it's in your agenda, in your registration package, the agenda, but just to sort of follow through what's going to happen, we're going to do this little getting to know you exercise for a few minutes shortly. Then we're going to hear a little bit about a project that happened that the clinic that I work at was involved in Clio with our public librarians. People are going to join me up here just after this next activity, and we're going to have a little informal conversation about that. And then we're going to have a break. And I think, are there butter tarts at this? Oh, lunch for the butter tarts. Oh dear. Anybody who went to law school and article here, and during the days that we had to come here for the education part of our articles knows all about the butter tarts here, so it's a bit of an in-joke, right, about you want to come here for butter tarts. But since then, there have been butter tart wars all over Ontario, but they're still pretty good here. Then we're going to have a break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to do another piece, and I'll tell you about that before the break, because we actually then want to hear about people I'm going to remind you right before our break, we want to hear from you about something that you might already be doing that we have no idea about. And I know there are a number of people in the room that are connected doing something already that we want to hear about in the morning. And then we'll have Janet Freeman from British Columbia, our keynote speaker after that, just before lunch, and then I'll tell you more about the afternoon then. Okay, so now Kathy, over to you. Huh?
Is there not a slide?
Is there a slide on this? Oh yes, but I've turned off the clicker, so yes, I think that there. Yeah, there you go.
Stall. Midland has a art festival in June. Really like butter tarts. There's usually about 50 different kinds of butter tarts.
I did do the slide. This is 6:30
and then Lisa is just as you watch this grow, we've kind of put libraries on one side, the justice kind of legal people on the other side. So we've kept it separate on purpose because the whole idea of the day is this is the important stuff that's going to happen. So really watch kind of the growing of the collaboration as it kind of goes for the day. So I'm excited to see where that goes. So no better person than Chris Bentley to talk about passion, right? So what we thought we would just start, this is just a very simple exercise, and the way the room's set up, all I need you to do is just talk to your neighbor, so it's kind of like you go to church, you have to say hi to the person sitting next to you. We just want you to share and what you're excited about regarding the problem statement, the challenge, the opportunity that Michelle talked about, what brought you here, just get some passion out by talking to your neighbor, and we'll just check back in.
I think I've talked to just about
If you don't have a
everybody
neighbor,
Okay, there we go. So we'll talk to you. I'm Wendy. Hi, Wendy. I'm Ingrid. Nova Scotia. You've come all the way from Nova Scotia?
I actually I just happened to be in Ontario this week, and a law librarian in Nova Scotia mentioned this conference to me, so I said, I should check it out.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I work at the public legal education organization, so similar to Clio. I've been trying to do outreach to the library.
Oh, okay. I was just at the beautiful beautiful new Halifax library this summer. It is beautiful.
There
Yeah.
in the summer?
Well, September.
So really, this is Kathy's.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It was very. When did it actually open?
So this, I'm not doing this. Kathy's doing this. I'm doing this.
It opened in the summer.
Oh, did it? Okay. Yeah.
We've got brand new from Kathy.
Are you with us?
We're both with the Community Advocacy and Legal Center.
Yeah, we have.
It's kind of boring to hear us talk because we're going to talk in a couple minutes. I don't want to
spoil it on whether Julie needs to be involved.
Do you work on the legal health checklist?
Somewhat, yeah.
Indirectly, probably. Yeah.
we got input into it.
Are you both lawyers at the...
I'm not. She is. Yeah. I'm the receptionist, and I do all the referrals and
Much more than receptionist.
it's just because I have gray hair. That's why. I've been around for a long time. But that's a screening tool that we try to use as best we can when we're talking to people that call in for either referrals or intake or whatever the case may be. I have. I'm not sure by the time.
It's more useful in going to PLE events and sort of showing it to other organizations and show it. Because a lot of times what they're not even recognizing is that some of these things are legal issues for people. So it's been more of a training tool for organizations for me that I don't deal directly with clients with legal health checks.
I guess I was wondering whether it would be something that we should adapt and use in that's all in rural areas. There's
No.
closing a lot of our public libraries.
Oh my goodness.
Closed now. There's a lot of courthouses that used to be open to the public, and now they're not.
See, they're actually going the opposite. They're trying to go the opposite right here. Sorry, we can move up. She's going to debrief the rest, but you guys can already be in place.
Okay. Sorry.
It's okay, I can hear more.
Yeah, and we. There was just a
Are you the one here from right?
Anyway.
Okay, we're going to have this conversation that actually has to do with
Yeah.
Well, there'll be lots of chance to network. Kathy, what are you doing?
Get it out. Get it out.
You're just taking that off and just send it to Carolyn as well. Well, I'm going to get people to talk because it doesn't really need me.
Do we look like Here's your, I have a copy of your visioning if you need that to refer to. You're good at winging it. So you're going to take this one? She's already done it, but...
I didn't know. She was just going to kind of ask around. I didn't know.
They're all wired up. So how are we going to do this? You do.
Okay, so see these two here, and use them as an example. It's going to go back to the network map and draw a line between them. So they need to
We're actually in the same community.
Okay, so first conversation we've had. So I love the energy went up when we started talking about your passion. You guys were all really well behaved, so maybe the Catherine hadn't kicked in before, but
Do we need another chair?
great noise happened. So just give me a couple examples. So what did you learn about your neighbor? What's the past over here? Say it again.
Nice people. He helped sign my check.
Oh, okay. Well, really, yeah.
Come over here. Is that we can go that way?
At the library where we
And I was talking about the fact that people actually don't know about special clinics and having and really popular about that later. But that will go out.
There we go.
Oh, you somebody over here.
My neighbor is a social worker at Community Legal Clinic, which is not that common, and so she's out in the community a lot. She supervises volunteer social work students, leveraging them, and she says she's got the best job there is. So.
I like my job, so So what do you guys like? What are you passionate about? What are you excited about for the day? Tell me a little bit about that.
I was going to say something else.
Okay, say something else and then.
My neighbor and I were talking about the challenges and the passion you share for communications, solving communications, communications advisor for legal aid, and that in the ED of a small rural area where there are communications challenges.
What I'm excited about is that Wendy from Stratford and Paul and I from Burlington are among the very few public libraries in Ontario that are also their local community, or have a role in local community information and referral provision already.
Yeah.
So what I'm really excited about is maybe being able to connect with people, because we all know if somebody walks into the library and the answer you get is no, there's no service for you, or no, I can't find anything, they're going to walk away if they trust us maybe more than they should. They think we know everything. So if we can have libraries understanding why it's important and makes them feel empowered to at least connect with people to a specialized information referral provider, wherever that may be, that would be huge, especially people living in poverty.
Okay. You're going to get time to talk about that stuff this afternoon. We're going to do a little, Michelle's going to get to channel her kind of inner Oprah or Ellen, or whatever she's kind of feeling right now. So we're going to do a kind of talk show format. So just to try to, there's so much information to share with you, we wanted to be able to just share a little bits and bites this morning, and then, like I said, you'll get all afternoon to kind of talk through in whatever detail you want. But over to Oprah.
Great, and I'm going to do this in a very informal way, so I'm just going to ask each of our talk show visitors to tell us who they are and why they're here.
Okay, hi, I'm Trevor Pross. I'm the CEO of the Belleville Public Library and John Impaired Art Gallery. I'm here just to share about our experiences with collaborating with the legal clinic and just learn more about different libraries, different communities through the province.
My name is Rita Turtle. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Quinte West Public Library. My community is very much an urban and rural divide. It's an amalgamated community. We have a center city and then a very large rural community, so it speaks very much to the divide we're discussing today. We were, both Trevor and I, were members of the committee, I guess, that acted as a pilot project in Ontario, but very much stealing from the BC situation. Thank you, BC. And just to share with you what we have learned, what as information providers in our community, we talked about trust earlier, as trusted information providers, what our role is in that community and how to empower our staff to give valuable referrals and information to those people who are really struggling to find their way through their path.
I'm Samantha Hayward, and I'm a lawyer with the Community Advocacy and Legal Center, and obviously was part of this project as well. And I'm here today, first off to talk a bit about what we did and try to stress that it can sound overwhelming when you're in a room full of people hearing lots of big ideas and lots of exciting innovations and a lot of just up here type of stuff, but you can break it down into very simple steps, and sometimes it's the simple things that you do that can actually create the big connections. So, and I'm also looking forward to hearing other ideas from other people about things that we haven't thought of doing that we could bring back to our own community.
My name is Ingrid Wood. I also work at the Community Advocacy and Legal Center, and I've been involved with the Library Outreach Project too for several years. It's been a joy for me to work on that project, and I've gotten to work with Trevor and Rita, Samantha, and 2 other public librarians, both Frances Smith and Kathy Anderson, who work in rural libraries as well. And it's been exciting for me to see, when we've all come together at one table, what we can come up with. And it's that connection and the sharing of information. And my hope is as well, I was very happy to hear Mr. Bentley mention, when you go away today, do one thing. Don't be overwhelmed by any of it. Just start with one thing.
I'm Michelle Cater, so I'm the Community Outreach Manager from CLEO. And I'm thinking about that one thing. I'm thinking about 100 things that I'd really like to do, so I'm going to try to focus a little bit. So we're a little bit different. We're a community legal clinic, but we're also a public legal education producer, so our lawyers and editors produce clear language legal information on many different topics for low-income and marginalized communities in print and online, and then we have lots of different websites that people can interact with. And we were involved in this project before my time at CLEO, but Julie Matthews and my colleague Kim McCutcheon were very involved in the Eastern Ontario project. And since that time, I've sort of been trying to continue the work that was done in Eastern Ontario, and then also branch out to other libraries across the province. And I've been seeing that there's lots of opportunity, but I'm really excited today to meet some people who can sort of meet us where we like to be met in terms of doing more work with libraries and creating more partnerships. Because as well as being a producer of the information, we really want to raise the capacity of community organizations, libraries included, to be providing that reliable information, legal information to your communities. So we're doing that by me going out and having doing trainings with people and getting our materials out, and supporting partnerships to do that work.
Great. And I'm going to be running a few slides that will not correspond with what people are talking about, so that you'll have a chance, those of you who like to kind of do 2 things at once, to sort of look at slides as they're running through and hear from our presenters. We've written, as we go through our next questions, we've written a report that there are copies. It was sent to you electronically before today's event. There's some copies on the table. And inside your registration package, you also have a little handout on the 10 lessons that we learned, which is really the key message. And we put together this report just so that if people were interested in starting something like we did, that you might want to start where we left off, or modify something we did, or improve on it, and you might as well see, and judge for yourself what that was. So some of the slides you'll see are the resources or your appendices to that, and some pictures of us doing our work when it started in 2012 in the library. So that's just for a little added visual piece while we go through. And I also want to acknowledge our courthouse librarian who's been part of this, who is not able to join us today, Judith Dale, who's been part of this project from the very outset. And our Hastings County Law Association has been very supportive of this work. So I do want to acknowledge that, even though she couldn't be with us. Yeah. All right, so now I'm going to ask you, can you tell us a little bit about the challenges that you've, and doesn't matter to me who talks, you guys get to figure this out. Tell me about the challenges that you're facing trying to reach people in rural and remote areas, and what we did to overcome those challenges.
Well, since Michelle's looking directly at me, I think I might want to take that.
Close to the microphone there, or pull the microphone a bit closer. Just so, I think, can people in the back hear Ingrid?
Can you hear me okay?
Good? Yeah, good, great. Well,
okay.
If you can, then it's good. Thanks, Ingrid.
You're welcome. So a few years ago, when we decided that we wanted to come together and share information with libraries and have them share information with us, we did organize a workshop to hold that in 2 areas in the counties that we serve. Unfortunately, we found out that a lot of the rural libraries were not able to attend. And why weren't they able to attend? Because they had very limited hours, because their funding is very limited, and they had very limited staff time. And when the libraries were open, the staff needed to be there. And they were very committed, of course, to their job, their position, and did not want to take the time away from that. We totally understood that, so we had to brainstorm a bit on the best way to do that. So what we decided to do was Kim McCutcheon, who was working at Clio at the time, who Michelle Cater is now doing that position, Samantha and myself, we loaded up my van with Clio materials and materials from the legal clinic, and we headed to Center Hastings. And we went from one library to the other, knocking on the doors, talking to the librarians, talking to the volunteers who work in the libraries, sharing the information, explaining to them about our websites, any information we could share, and in turn, they were sharing information with us. We were able to glean a lot of great information and knowledge. We were also able to physically see the library, to see how much room they had or how much room they didn't have. Came up with some ideas, possibly bookmarks would be a good idea. Do you want a poster? We don't have room for posters. We could put one on the bookends or on the end of the bookshelves. Okay, we'll come up with that. So that was how we overcame some of the obstacles that we had.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think really what it came down to in terms of trying to make the connections to improve the access for the rural communities was that communication piece, was just picking up the phone, attending the libraries, you know, collaborating with everyone to see what we could do. You know, in a lot of cases, the solutions were pretty simple. It didn't have to be, you know, something great. A lot of times, you know, for these libraries, Belleville and Trenton, which are bigger libraries, we were able to host an actual event where the librarians could come and learn about legal resources and what's credible and what's not credible. But for the smaller libraries, we knew that didn't work. But by contacting them, same thing with, you know, I'm speaking a bit on behalf of Judith, the courthouse librarian, but she did tell me what to say. So she wanted people to know, especially the courthouse librarians and the law librarians, that it didn't really create any extra work. That was our goal, was not to create any extra work, just to have better communication and referrals between each other to help access some of those rural and remote communities that are otherwise floating out there with really only their libraries as a point of contact.
I think, speaking from the perspective of a library, anybody who's ever worked in a library is familiar with the concept of loading up their own personal vehicle with stuff and driving it around. It's part of what we do. It's part of trying to get information out to our community. But when you are outside of the GTA, you are dealing with not just distance between individuals, you're dealing with distance to the community hub that provides the information. And libraries are very much a community hub. I like to say we put the public back in public library. On any given day, Chris Bentley was very, very accurate when he said, you can walk into a public library and you can see the richest of the rich and the poorest of the poor. Our job as information providers is not just to put the information into the hand of the person who needs it, but to help them find the information at a level they can understand, which is why Trevor and I had a bit of a conversation about the graphic that was going on there. When you're dealing with, and I'm not in any way, shape, or form trying to say this only happens in rural communities, because literacy is a serious, serious barrier to any information, and justice information particularly, because we all speak with our very own professional dialogue. There's a lot of times we can talk as librarians and we speak in acronyms and nobody understands what we're saying. And I hate to tell you, but lawyers do it too. So, you know, when we're dealing with people who have low literacy levels and trying to take the information that they need or trying to put them in connection with the resource that they require, we have to do a bit of interpretation. And this project, I think, helped to break down some of the barriers that exist in those silos, the libraries and the legal system, because we're all serving the same public. So I think that's the important part to take away from today. Or that was my one of the most important parts of my takeaway.
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of Clio's work, I mean, what we do is we have our lawyers on staff that do the legal research and writing of the materials, but then we have editors that are very well trained as editors, but they're not lawyers, and so they really break down the language, and so that the materials are clear language and plain language, and they're designed in that way and they're written in that way. So that's sort of where Clio's role can really we can really partner well with the libraries because we have the information to meet people where they are. I mean, we have the grade 8 is the reading level of our materials, so certainly you still have to have some literacy, but the idea is that it can really be accessible to many, many people. And sorry, the other thing is that my role as an outreach person was just created a few years ago, so Clio has a provincial mandate, so they are prioritizing to say, they need, we need to get out there, we need our materials to get out there, we need me to get out there and make these connections and really reach out in places that we haven't been able to be before.
And what's this a picture of up here, Michelle? Can you see what that is?
Yeah, so that's one of the Clio pamphlet stands, and we used to have the funding to have those stands. We haven't been able to figure out an inexpensive option for the pamphlet stands, but we used to send out these great pamphlet stands, and they had room for about 16 or 12 or 16 of our pamphlets. And there's all sorts of reactions and different realities for libraries. We don't have the shelf space. There's nowhere to put it. Where can we put it? So the pamphlet stands were kind of a good, it solved a lot of those space issues. It could just go somewhere. So now we don't have the pamphlet stands anymore.
Oh no, fundraiser at lunch.
We also,
I'm serious. Look at the tape on this one. It's time for a new one.
Yeah.
Like this is a well-used one from our clinic. I didn't know you guys weren't giving those out anymore.
But we also are finding that one of the big challenges is that librarians, all across the province, whether they're in urban spaces or rural spaces, it hasn't really, it's not necessarily anyone's role to take care of that and to make sure that, Clio's information or other community information is stocked. I mean, everyone knows that you have to take care of your collection, you have to take care of your catalog. But in terms of other information, where ours is a little bit different than a poster that advertises the local harvest festival, which is important, but ours is sort of substantive information, but it seems to fall somewhere through the holes of it's not in the main collection, it's not one of the books on the shelves, it doesn't have a spine. Janet Freeman was talking about it. If it doesn't have a spine, it's really hard for us to keep track of it. So we were finding that it's very challenging for libraries to keep our materials, to keep them stocked, to keep them up to date. And so I want to find out and hear from some people as to what some good ideas would be for that piece of it.
We focused a lot too on really trying to get electronic resources into the libraries for people, because we know, everybody who has a library, whether it's public library or courthouse library, you have such a limited space. And so really we just wanted to make sure that the public libraries in particular had those plain language resources that were reliable and credible, so that they could refer people to them without having to worry about the space and the collection being up to date.
Yeah, and I think people put the little, what do you call those names? The logo. You made a link on your desktops. Do you want to just talk about that for a sec? Because we felt that was such a small thing, but it was like really important. And maybe you might want to explain about that, Rita.
Well, what libraries provide information. We link to all sorts of resources, but by putting a link on our webpage, it sort of gave some credibility to the information that the individual was going to find. Somebody talked earlier about reliable information that you find online, and that's part of what librarians do, is we evaluate the information that's available out there. I mean, the internet's a wonderful resource, but you have to be able to look at it in a critical manner and figure out who's providing the information and what the relevance of that information is to the individual who's requiring the information. So by, I hate to use the word, but by legitimizing Clio, we sort of gave our users a quick and easy way to find that information that they were able to interpret and use, whether it was to find a further resource in the community or to find print information, and I go back to print, but any kind of information that's tactile that they could then use in their search for information to their justice needs.
So I happen to have just put up a link to a page that people might want to have based on our experience. Want to tell us about that, Michelle?
Yeah, so your legal rights. So Clio has its own main website with all of our information that's available in print and online and in different formats, printable HTML and PDF. But then we also have another website called Your Legal Rights, which is the homepage is up there right now. And it's a clearinghouse of legal information that's written by hundreds of organizations around Ontario. So if the Ministry of the Attorney General writes something, we have it up there. If the Belleville Clinic writes something, we have it up there. So it's really one of the best legal information websites. Well, I would say it's the best legal information website in Ontario, because you really can reach out. It reaches out and pulls all the information into one space. And we're revamping it now so that it has more information in terms of in a question and answer format. So questions that people would ask, that a layperson would ask, and we're trying to really frame the questions in the way that people would ask them. They can find the answer to that with a legal resource paired with it, or a referral to a service that would help someone with that. So that's what's up there, and so that's what we had asked libraries to have links to, both the Clio page as well as the Your Legal Rights page, so that people who are on the public access computers see, oh, there's a legal site right there, and we know that the information is reliable and applies in Ontario, both of which are really important.
The other piece to that, the other piece to that too is the confidentiality is such a big deal for people in rural, remote communities, because everybody knows everybody and nobody wants everybody knowing their business. So by having the links available online, it just provided a little bit more privacy than having to go and get the print resource and have somebody see you.
Yeah, and in the case of our project, you'll know if you've seen the report, because there's actually more pictures in the report than are on this slide presentation. There's a picture of the Desierato Public Library and how they put a link up to our clinic's website and to the Clio and Your Legal Rights, which was great. So I'm going to ask another question, but then I'm going to open the floor up for about 5 minutes of questions before our break. So there may be something you want to ask about sort of feasibility or something. I don't know what you might want to ask, but I do want to have a time for people to ask questions. But before we wrap up, we've got our 10 lessons learned. There may have been highlights of the project for you. Could each of you just comment on something that was a highlight for you or an important lesson that was learned?
Okay. I think an important lesson, which connects to what we were just talking about with the website versus print, is you need a multi-faceted approach, and you need to do various different formats. So some people might feel more comfortable with the pamphlets. That's what they go to, they see that, they look through. Other people, younger, people usually that's not even on their radar. They don't even think to go to a book or a pamphlet or a poster. It's completely not in their field of vision. So public libraries are constantly balancing between, the person that wants everything downloaded to their smartphone and the other person who's asking you for a cassette tape that, my kids don't even know what those are, right? So it's a balance, and it's definitely important to have both. So you have the thing on your website, you have the electronic sources, but don't neglect the print. A lot of people are much more comfortable with print. And now with the accessibility being on everyone's radar with the legislation, you have to keep that in mind as well. So you need your accessible information, you need your audiobooks, and things like posters and websites. So a good mix is important.
Lesson learned, I would say the information is wonderful, but you need individuals to put that in the hands of the people who need that information. And in a public library setting, that's our staff. To give our staff confidence that they are providing good information. The last thing a librarian wants to do is provide misinformation. It undermines our credibility. So by giving our staff the confidence to know where to go for good information, or where to refer people to find that information, or to find those individuals within the community, was very, very valuable. That confidence level not only shows on the part of the staff person, but on the part of the person leaving the library who has found what they came in looking for. So it really is a two-way street. I talked about the visual over there. At first I was a little perturbed because there was library on one side and the justice angle on the other. I'm very glad to see we're planning to fill in the middle, because the middle is the meat. So I would say, from my perspective, just having my staff go through a confidence-building workshop that helped them to find and distribute good information is of infinite value.
I think for me, there's two really. The first is just making those connections. Picking up the phone. I think I'm probably going to steal Ingrid's thunder here and she's going to snack me. But making the connections between people that you maybe didn't think about before. And the other is keeping it simple. I'm going to sound like a broken record, but it doesn't have to be a big project. It doesn't have to be an overwhelming thing. It doesn't have to suck a lot of time up. Really just even making that initial contact with either your library, your law association, your legal clinic, depending on your courthouse library, depending on where, just to get that conversation flowing and get that connection made so that you can talk about, well, what do I do here? Because, I know a lot of law libraries, they have people wander in off the streets and law libraries don't tend to have that information that is easily accessible for the person who is coming off the streets. They have great information for lawyers, but people who come in because the judge told them to go down to the law library, they don't even know where to start. And you hand them, a textbook or the legislation and they're lost. So being able to even send them over to the public library and say, they've got some resources, or getting the CLIO resources there, those kinds of connections. It doesn't have to be big, it doesn't have to be grand, it doesn't have to take a lot of time, just to make those simple steps that can greatly improve access to justice for the people who are walking through the doors.
What she said, and one of the lessons learned, actually two lessons learned, and I'll start at the end and work forward. It was very important when our project was sort of narrowing down somewhat to celebrate what we had accomplished. It was very important to come together and celebrate that and remember how we did it. Moving forward at the beginning, the lesson learned in that area, the excitement that began again by coming around the table. It started with an idea, and then to see what everyone else could bring to it. That was one of the best for me.
Well, lessons, I guess, that I continue to learn. I mean, I think Michelle talked about this a little bit, but in terms of the challenges that librarians have in rural and remote areas, the size of the library and the time that staff have to do other kinds of training, I understand now is really limited, and just attending a training. So things like offering webinars, or me going there at a time. Someone was suggesting sometimes rural and remote libraries have really limited hours. They might not open till 10. Maybe if you can go do a training before they open so that they're available. So those kinds of really specific things that seem small. But then the other thing that I learned was when I did get to do trainings with librarians, they were very keen and kind of hungry for this information. And one of the specific things that we would talk about is the difference between giving legal information and giving legal advice. So the thing to be really clear about is we're not suggesting that librarians should become lawyers, that librarians need to do that kind of formalized training, but so discussing that difference and how to really draw that line in a careful way, in a professional way, in an informed way, but then stressing that sharing the right, that reliable legal information can really go a long way. It's not just that people will be helped in their legal problems by legal advice from a lawyer or representation, but legal information can do a lot for people to address these problems.
Great, thank you, Michelle. Just a couple more additions from my perspective as a person who was involved in the project at the very beginning, was also the willingness of our courthouse librarian to provide resources to our public librarians if needed, right? Because there really wasn't a lot on the shelf. If you've read your report, the first thing we tried to do was to make sure there was accurate legal material on the shelves, because that's something that changes all the time. So you can read we're not going through all the details of that report, that's why we provided it to you. But Judith offered that if anybody needed anything, it turns out nobody has so far, but who knows? It might be that they could come to her for that kind of help, right? The other thing I remember that Judith did was she also made CLIO materials available in the Law Association library. So she took that responsibility for the people who might show up in her law library, that they could find the easy to read CLIO materials there, and that she, as a courthouse librarian, was completely familiar with the CLIO resources and our resources and the Your Legal Rights page. And I think that was important. And the other thing I wanted to point out, if I remember what I'm doing here, was that Clio has since now gone ahead and, because I don't think I'll get another chance to tell you this, so there's information here about their different legal resources, and I'm sure there's information on the table about this too.
Beyond the food.
And their website. No, that's not, I want this, I want this. So this, now Christina is responsible for this. Christina, wave your hand. So Christina has actually created a space for us to begin to share information about what's going on. The link was in your confirming email that we sent, but it's kind of a really cool thing because things are coming into that site all the time. So our report's there, Janet's putting linkages there, the PowerPoints from today, everything you'll find linked in there. So there's actually a place, and this is called the PLEA Learning Exchange. So it's a virtual way of knowledge sharing, information sharing that Clio's set up to support this project so that you can just go to one place to find things, I think after today, right? All right, does anybody have any questions of our presenters? Jamie.
Okay, I just want to know if you agree with me, but my takeaway from what everybody said the whole time they've been talking, we can very easily be seduced by all these wonderful things that are going to happen with technology, but my lesson from when you started was that we cannot emphasize the importance of the human connection.
Absolutely.
There needs to be a direct interface with a person doing something. So
Always.
We need to make it abundantly clear to funders that just because you can come up with technological solutions or additions or augmentation, you can't replace the people. That's the most important part of this puzzle. That's my takeaway. Do you agree with me on that?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
It's very comforting for me just to hear this presentation.
Yeah.
On that note, the thing with libraries, especially public libraries, is we're sort of a million different things to a million different people. So you're dealing with short staff, you're dealing with a huge range of services. So if you don't have that personal connection to say, you know, how are you doing? How are your staff doing? And the talking to people, like when I started to talk to my staff, there really were some insecurities and nervousness about legal information. They don't want to be giving the wrong information. They don't want to be stepping over that boundary to the legal advice. So it was only through that communication and meeting and getting together and talking about it. And when you're dealing with a million things, the legal information part of it can get lost in the shuffle. So if you have that direct connection where someone's calling you and saying, do you need any more pamphlets? Do you need us to help you look at your resources, make sure they're up to date? That's huge. So I think that's a really good point.
And on the behalf of the public side of it, to be able to walk into an institution that has people standing there who are trained to help is invaluable. Mr. Bentley spoke about trust. He actually used the word trust, and that's a very powerful word. And as librarians, just by virtue of what we do, we have a lot of trust from our community. So we are able to deal with those people face to face, whether they are, you know, someone with absolutely no resources or someone who can access all the resources that are out there. We put information on our shelves, we file them on our servers. That's all very nice and very handy, but you have to be able to retrieve it, and you have to be able to put it in those people's hands, and that's where the public library plays a slightly different role than lawyers and legal information and perhaps courthouse librarians.
The other piece too about that connection and the need to have that face-to-face is that's where the conversation starts about making proper referrals.
Yes.
I think that was another key component of our project, was getting our referrals in the hands of the librarians and you know, courthouse library, and then also starting that discussion, and you know, because they'd look at our referral list and go, oh, that's interesting, what about this, but did you guys also know about this? And that really helped. And without having that face-to-face or the phone-to-phone contact of actually dealing with the people, you know, some of the things we've never discovered.
Yeah, and so I think using that legal health check approach seems to be something the librarians really like, the kind of things you might hear that might red flag you, that someone's got a legal problem you might not have thought was a legal problem. That seems to be something that's helped a lot. And we use case studies when we met, right? That was a fascinating thing. You can read about it in the report. The other thing from our perspective in rural areas, like we're really stretched. Like, so the clinic that I work at has a main office in Belleville, and then we have 6 satellites. like we're there maybe 3 or 4 times a month in those communities. So having librarians who know the community better than we do, who usually reside in those communities, whereas most of us are traveling in, depending on the community, some of them we live in. But we have 9,000 square kilometers, right? And we're not the clinic with the largest serviced area. There's other ones in the north in particular with larger service areas. It was really important for us to know that we could trust our librarians too to work with us. So that part was important. Another question?
I have one about when you were discussing the training of the actual librarians going in early, and you discussed webinars. Was there something put into place that is available specifically to that? Or
yeah, right now there's every webinar that we do at Clio is archived. So there's a webinar right now on the Your Legal Rights site that's and the Plea Learning Exchange site, I think, that's for librarians.
It is for librarians.
Yeah, there's one that was specifically for librarians. It's a 1-hour webinar. It's obviously very different from the other trainings that I do are usually 3-hour in-person trainings, and we do a lot of working through, as Michelle said, case scenarios and things. And we have computers in the room, and we look online, and we sort of solve the problems together, kind of thing, in terms of finding information. But there is a webinar now, and you can find a link to it on that page from the Plea Learning Exchange site.
Is it on the resources section?
Well, yeah, if you just go to that page, really, if you just go to the Plea Learning Exchange, you can start to follow it through. Look at me here. Like this is even on the front page, on the home page, you're going to see Plea for Librarians, and then you're going to see it somewhere else here. And anywhere you click on it, you're going to get to this lovely photograph. Yes. And when you get to that lovely photograph, Christina has link after link of things that you need to know. She's got it all through one little portal, and it's there. And it's also in my confirming
librarians, but I have lots of business cards here. They're on the table there. Please, if you have any questions, something that you can't find, email me and I'll
Great, and you'll be around on the break, which we're going to take now. And just one question from you, and then we're going to have a break.
I think the information is also in the paper that was emailed around.
The report. Hyperlinks view electronically. Okay, one last question.
I just think you made such a good point earlier, Michelle, that people aren't necessarily going where we think they're going. And not only are people not seeking out legal information from the clinics, but they're not always able to make it into the library, and especially in rural and remote areas, as you pointed out. Some people are so far from their community hub, and so when we want to have these conversations, really thinking about the most vulnerable pockets of our communities, people who can't make it in to the public access computers, people who can't make it in to get the pamphlets from their libraries. So how do you meet those people and their needs without working on the assumption that everyone can make it into their library, right? And everyone can make it into their clinic. So I think, I love that these conversations are taking place, but really trying to remember that there's a really deep need. Like that's where the work really needs to focus as well. That how can we outreach? And outreach is like really basic sense of the word, not trying to get everyone in, but recognizing that some people are more comfortable in these spaces and trying to figure out how we can bring the information then to them in a meaningful way.
And if I could just make one comment about that, and I mean, I'm the only person that really goes out from Clio and is able to do this kind of work, but I'm doing this work with librarians. I'm also trying to do it with health professionals that work in health centers and sending information to people in food banks. So I'm really trying to go and have the materials and have the training for as many people as possible in different sectors. So we're talking about libraries today in particular, but certainly knowing that some people, the only way you're going to get them to go anywhere is if they need something physically for their body, the health center, the food bank, those their Ontario Works office, those kinds of things. So I'm trying to do that work, but any suggestions and connections you can have for me would be much appreciated.
So that's the kind of conversation we want to have this afternoon.
Yeah,
exactly. Conversation where people come and talk about that, those deep questions, get the right people around the table. That's a really good example of what
yes, and Marlena is a very ambitious Master of Library Information Science student, so she's got some pretty radical ideas. And I shouldn't say it, but her mother happens to be sitting right beside her. And she is the Legal Clinic Executive Director in Guelph. So I'm like totally pumped about the kind of magical things that happen in our lives as a mother that we never expect to happen. And who knew, 20 years ago or whatever it is, that this could be happening. And this is one of the little pieces of magic, I think, happening in this room. So a couple of things what we need to think about now that I need to remember to tell you. So one is any more stuff, if you're not on that map, you need to get on the map and think about who you want to connect to and your hopes. You've got about 15 minutes for your break, and we'll call you back in. And when we come back in, people like Doug are going to tell us, and I don't know who you are yet. I know who a few of you are. You're going to tell us a little bit about something you've been doing connected to this issue in a library, or so that we get a bit of a sense of what's already happening in the room besides what we've already told you about. And then we're going to do that for about 15 minutes or so, and then we're going to have Janet tell us all about what they've been doing in British Columbia for the last while, which is quite fascinating, and I'm sure will inspire you as we head into the lunch hour. So break time now, 15 minutes.
So I'm part of the Boldness Project, and so we believe very, very much in something called proof of possibility. So what that means is when you present a group with a big challenge or problem, you have to show some sort of proof that it's possible. And so we know that proof of possibility is already in the room because we know you're already doing good stuff. So we just want to do a bit of a pop-up where you stand up, brag about the stuff you're working on, and then sit back down because then everybody's going to want to grab you in the afternoon and talk about the good stuff you've done. So who wants to brag first? Who wants to be the first one to give us some sense of possibility? All right, one back here.
Okay,
Go for it.
I'm Sheila with the Ontario Library Association. So we're interested in supporting this provincially. So how can we communicate with all types of libraries across the province and help link people to legal resources through their libraries? So we can help libraries do that.
Awesome. Can you guys all hear if you want your mics? Okay. What's that?
I'm Mariana from Ontario Library Service North. And we actually create websites for our local public libraries. So I could see the possibility of perhaps linking to put them right onto the template for public libraries. So we can do this.
Awesome. Another one over here, I think.
I'm Glynis Maxwell from Burlington Public Library. I don't want to brag about us, I actually want to brag about Clio. We found some space to put the Clio legal materials in our library about 4 years ago. They are, bar none, the ones that are picked up the most. They allow people who don't, and this is where it applies, I think, to small rural communities, who don't actually want me to help mediate their information or referral. They can just kind of go in the quiet corner and browse it. They're clear, we know they're authoritative, and it's made life a lot easier for our staff because now when they get that question, it makes me feel like deer in the headlights. They know to walk over and look for the okay. So thank you, Clio, is I guess what I'm saying.
Another one.
We're in sort of a rural area, but we have some very
proudly stand.
We're in the Niagara region, and we have some extreme rural areas just outside of that. So we're trying to connect to those rural areas by using the library services. So we just started a program, or are just starting a program in November with the Wainfleet Library, which is a community that's been very hard to reach out to. It's a huge geographical area, but they do have a town center, and the library is right in the center of their town. So that's what we're using.
Great. Are you with Justice Niagara?
Yes.
Yes, and great. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Doug.
We didn't mention you on the list, but you can just did.
I run the student legal clinic at Western Law School. It's called Kingsley Legal Services. And we have about 150 law students that work in the clinic at some point or other during the course of an academic year. And we're putting together a plan to set up a pilot project using technology to leverage law schools to reach up to rural communities. I grew up in rural Ontario, in Atlantic County. When I go back to my hometown, I see that the only businesses left are pretty much the bank, the post office, and the funeral home. Right? It's very sad. Small towns are suffering. So I want to...
Church and school's gone, eh?
Pardon me?
The church and the school is gone.
Yeah, that's right. And the hospitals are gone too. Right? And of course, there's not many lawyers around there either. So we've got new premises built for us in the law school. I included in there a flat screen TV set up to a computer so we can Skype or use some video technology. And I want to start a pilot project where law students can connect with libraries in small towns or First Nations reserves. And the law students, under the supervision of a lawyer, can provide brief advice or help fill out forms. And the lawyer there to make sure it's done right. And we make sure they get it in writing by way of email or fax. And we do it probably in the early evening when people are home from work and can access the library. So that's kind of where we're going. I want to do a pilot project with about half a dozen libraries. I want to see if we can work with the other community clinics in southwestern Ontario. We may be able to do something together. I have some money to hire more. I think the key issue will be the library hardware, right? Because libraries will need the proper computer and video technology and bandwidth to do this. And we have to do a survey to see what's there. But I intend to look for funding to help libraries if necessary upgrade their hardware and see if we can connect that way. So I can talk to Sheila from the OLA, and I've already talked about this, and I'd like to get this underway sometime late 2016.
Okay, I would like to get it underway this afternoon. So we asked you guys to host another conversation. Usually a good one. The host will give you a big room because people know you have lots of money, and I don't even say lots of money. So that's another good example of a conversation that can start this afternoon that we want to get going. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over.
No, but I know there's more in the room, and they're just being a little quiet. So is Sarah in here?
All right, Michelle's going to pick on you guys.
Sarah!
Yeah.
What are you doing, Sarah? Why are you here? Where are you from?
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm a former academic law librarian. I'm currently a research fellow at Harvard. I know everyone's, ooh, Harvard. It's library. It's just and currently what I'm doing is researching the intersection of libraries and access to justice, and just learning how school or how libraries are kind of filling that gap there, because there is legal information available. Why I like Canada for many reasons, you guys. I love Canada.
Healthcare.
Yeah. So, and if you don't fight everyone, it's great. But you are a little bit more proactive in providing legal information to the public with your CanLII, with the things that are going out in DC as far as Quick Law, the wiki books, and just making legal information much more accessible. Kind of a brag thing, it was just in the New York Times. I used to library the Mason Lab at Harvard, and what they're doing now is a project that could be replicable, is that they've gone through and are digitizing all of our court case laws. So some of the things that are missing in CanLII. It'd be a project for libraries to make that stuff that's locked away in books, make it more digitally accessible for the rural communities, or people who otherwise can't physically get to a library, because that is obviously one of the huge problems that I'm seeing, is that people literally physically can't get to a library, and the way legal information is being distributed through subscription databases, you have to physically be in the library to use the digital thing, which doesn't make sense. You should be able to use it anywhere. So making these free and accessible legal information portals, such as CanLII or such as Harvard's Free the Law project, is kind of the future, I think.
Did you call it Free the Law?
Free the Law. That's what
Free
they call
the Law project. Cool name. You Americans, you always have the best names ever. Now, wait a second. I seem to recall that when you and I had a little bit of email correspondence, because I did email some of you who I thought, oh my God, why is this person coming? You said what to me about this book that you're writing?
I am writing a book. That's kind of the goal of my fellowship here. So if you're familiar with the book Silent Spring, about how chemical companies sort of destroyed the ecology, and how that's kind of the theme, the vibe I'm going for in my book. I kind of jokingly call it silent shelves, although our shelves are pretty quiet anyway when they're active. But I'm studying the history of also legal publishing. How do we get to this point where all of our legal information is locked away behind paywalls, pretty much under the control of commercial entities, instead of being a publicly available legal information source, and especially the transition from print to digital has made it much worse instead of much better. So hopefully, I've never written a book before, and hopefully it'll work out. If not, I guess I'll be seeking help with my contract violation.
We've only told, 80.
I think it's pretty exciting, pretty out there.
So in the Boldness Project, we talk a lot about leading the way, leading the world in access to justice in rural and remote communities. So we are a global conversation, at least a North American conversation today. So we're really happy that you're here with us. Michelle, do you want to pull up a couple more?
Yeah, I thought the Workplace Safety Library, did they have a couple of things they wanted to say? Yeah.
We're the Ontario Workplace Tribunal Library, and we represent 3 tribunals, the Ontario Labour Relations Board, the Pay Equities Hearing Tribunal, and the Workplace Safety Insurance Appeals Tribunal for worker compensation cases coming from WSIB. So we are open to people who are representing themselves before our tribunals who just want a little more information on labor law, employment, safety law, occupational health and safety, or I should say employment standards, or workplace injuries. We do have an open reference line. We have questions coming in from all over the province through our emails. We try and help as much as we can, you know, taking some of those loose leaf legal resources and photocopy what we can under the legal guidelines, under copyright, and direct people to resources to help them. We also have direct relation to OWA, the Ontario Worker Advisor, and the Ontario Employment Advisor, where they will represent injured workers and those under the labor at our hearings. So we make connections with them. I just found out through the legal aid clinics that they don't really know about the OWA and OWA, so perhaps, you know, just a little more marketing out of the resources that we have available. And certainly would love to host some CLEO materials in our library.
Well, it's just so interesting because I've been doing this work, I shouldn't admit it, for 30 years, and I did not know that there was that kind of access to your library. So this is something amazing that I learned today. So look forward to bringing that information back even to our own staff.
So I'm Catherine Gamble-Lurchner. I'm from the Client and Lawyer Support Center at Legal Aid. I'm here to free the lawyers now that I've got a new tagline. And we're all about access to justice in rural areas. We have lawyers on the phone that people can talk to. There is a financial criteria still for that service, but that's what I'm here to learn about, is how to get them to new information, and so the reference to other resources besides those that we already know from Legal Aid.
Yeah, so I think that's an important thing. A lot of people don't realize that Legal Aid now offers summary advice information over the telephone. That's a really critical piece. Yeah. Good. Howard, I was hoping you'd put your hand up. There we go.
Yeah, you can't hear me. My name is Howard Tesler. I'm with the Federation of Metro Tenants, and why I'm here today is that we are the recipients of a second Connecting Access to Justice grant to set up tenant schools for training, this time in rural communities, to train frontline community and social agency workers in tenant law. And for the next 2 years, we're going to be doing this. We're setting up in 6 areas of the province in rural Ontario. Well, I'm from Montreal, so everything is rural, you know, like Toronto is rural. But we're set up for January to start in the Niagara region, in May to go to Owen Sound, and the real reason I'm here is to fill out the next 4 after that. Although people have told me that Belleville would be interested.
Well, our two of our folks are here, so they can.
Yeah, I know.
Samantha, yeah, they can tell you about our.
So what I want to know from you is when I can come up to your small towns and set up these training sessions. There are going to be 6 workshops over 2 days. Hopefully lawyers and staff, legal staff of the local legal clinics will be doing the presentations, facilitating. We have already templates on the workshops, PowerPoint workshops that have been developed and modified over 3 years. So that's pretty good. We just have to tweak them.
So that sounds like a collaborative conversation potentially this afternoon, right? How to get it
alone?
Do you have money?
We're good. After Janet does her talk and explains to us about British Columbia, I'm then going to explain the afternoon format, but we're all going to be choosing things that we want to learn about or talk about or take action on. So you've obviously got something going on, Doug's got something going on, we've heard other things in the room. Kathy's going to tell us about how to get those ideas up on a board, and we're going to have 2 opportunities to meet with people at least to talk about.
I brought 50 brochures.
And that's perfect for that session this afternoon, which I'm going to explain in a minute. And I also understand there's a concern in the room about self-represented litigants from the Supreme Court of Canada. And so I thought maybe the folks from there might want to say a word or two about that, because the needs of self-represented litigants were way more than we ever tried to do in our community. So let's just hear about that for a sec.
My name is Francois. I work in the registry at the Supreme Court of Canada. About a third of our files are all self-reps. So our goal is really to facilitate their access to information and access to justice. Some of the stuff that we do is send out forms for the applications that they have to complete. We do have a whole section on our website, resources for self-reps, so that they can consult that. They can always call in. We try to provide them as much as possible to that kind of information, and we also refer them to pro bono service. It's Supreme Court of Canada Leave to Appeal Assistance Project that they have by Law Help Ontario. So they do sit with the self-reps and guide them through the process and try to provide legal advice if they qualify. And our goal is just really to connect with libraries to really get that information out there.
Great, thank you.
Can I ask who's funding that? I'm just curious.
Supreme Court of Canada?
Yeah, who's funding the project, the information access project?
Well, it's a separate project. It's pro bono, Law Help Ontario. So we're not necessarily affiliated with them. We just direct people to them, and they administer their own organization.
Great. Okay, well, thank you very much. So that's about, is there anybody else who wants to say one quick thing? And if not, we're going to move over to hearing from Janet here, who's got, her bio is in the, on your agenda, but of course it doesn't do justice to everything about Janet that we need to know. So she was a source of great inspiration to me in planning our local project initially. And I also have now learned even more about her since we had dinner together last night to prepare for today, about her very varied background, which I think you're going to tell us just a little bit about. So this is going to be a very informal kind of coffee table conversation. Imagine us over dinner last night. We were actually saying it'd be nice if we should have a glass of wine. That part would have been a really great part of it. So why don't we start this way, Janet? Just tell a little bit about yourself and how you got involved.
I will. All right. I think it's interesting in terms of rural and remote that I grew up in a small town. So I have very strong interest in the services needed in a small town, but my adult life has been all in urban centers, mostly Vancouver. So my background professionally, after I did a library degree, I worked in public libraries in Edmonton and Vancouver. And then I kind of moved sideways and I went to a community group. It's called Battered Women Support Services, and I became a legal advocate and counselor, and had a little library there, of course. And I got trained. The legal advocates in BC are all supervised by a lawyer, so it's just an amazing opportunity to learn about the law. And I got a real passion for legal information. And from there, I went over to Legal Services Society, which is BC Legal Aid. And I did outreach work, so legal information outreach and working with community groups throughout the province around training and helping us with our publications at Legal Services. And then, it was interesting, it's almost 30 years after I left public library work, this job came up working at courthouse libraries, who were actually bringing back a program that Legal Aid had been doing with public libraries. And I was lucky enough to get that position in the last 7 years. That's been my specialty. I'm mostly working with public libraries, but also community groups and just services for the public. That's my strong area of background.
So, you told us a little bit about how you got to be involved with Law Matters, but how did it all start?
The Law Matters program? Well, it goes back. Do you want me to talk about courthouse libraries?
Yes, that's right. That's a good question.
We've got the slides.
That's right.
We have a vision statement. This is very new. It wasn't even published last week. It could be published this week. But this is our vision for courthouse libraries that everybody in BC has legal information. Now, just to tell you a bit about the structure of courthouse libraries, because it's different than Ontario. In BC, we have one society. It was created in 1975 as a separate society from the Law Society. Even though we're funded, right now it's 50% from the Law Society. And interesting for me, because I wrote a history of the program I've been doing, I went back to the Constitution of 1975, and the very first Section A talks about we serve as the legal community and the public. So legal information to the public, and B was to support public libraries, which was a big revelation to me because it wasn't until 2002 that, and I'm going to go through the history. So this is a bit of our strategic plan, and again, our structure. We're one society. We have 28 locations throughout the province. So the Courthouse Library in Vancouver is the center, and we organize training for lawyers throughout the province, and we organize all the resources in 28 locations, and the training for all the staff. And so in 7 locations, we have librarians who will help the public as well as the legal community. And then we have smaller locations that have limited hours to the public, but it is available at least 1 day a week, so that the resources are there for them to use. And then we have a toll-free phone number, an email service, a website that people can use to contact us and ask legal reference questions. All right. So the question was, how did it all get started? So I have written this article on the history of the program, and it's been wonderful to have this event to make me reasonably finish the article. So I'm very happy to get to this point. And the services began in BC in 1975, and it was based on research on access to justice. In 1973, 1974, there was a federal research, it was actually a book was published, and then one in BC did the same thing, almost the same time. And strong recommendations that public libraries be involved in access to justice. So the Legal Services Society was set up, and one of the first things they did was start Legal Information Service, and part of that was the Public Libraries Program, which is just amazing to me that it started that early. And Meg Richardson, when Michelle used that very inspiring quote, which I think I'm going to have to lift and put in my article because I forgot about it, and it's a great quote about how important public libraries are in the chain of delivering a service. So Meg started the program, and she then moved on, and I know that she went to the Department of Justice, and that she did very innovative programs across Canada, actually. And she was also involved with the courthouse libraries set up in 1975. And I just found out 2 weeks ago that it was probably thanks to Meg that we had the public libraries, support for public libraries in our Constitution, which we did not act on until actually 2007. It took that long. All right. So what are we doing next?
Oh, that's me. Okay.
Oh,
what are some of the key
still doing
features?
history. So
Oh, more history, okay.
Yeah, well, this is just a simplified version. The fact is that Legal Services Society set up a public libraries program and ran it until 2002. So it was a nice long period for development, a range of services for public libraries, a small, very small grants program, bibliographies were provided, and some training. It's kind of hit and miss as people were available to do it.
And sorry to interrupt, but your Legal Services Society is our Legal Aid in Ontario.
Yeah, Legal Aid.
Confusing
for it. It should be called Legal Aid, but
it's not.
So huge cutbacks, 2002, 40% cutbacks. Everything kind of died. People were let go. The woman who ran the program for 15 years, Nancy Hannum, was out of a job. Now, she was involved with courthouse libraries, and she was on the board, and she got to know the new executive director came on. Her name is Johanne Blinken. She's still there. Very dynamic executive director. And also had some background with public libraries, had been a librarian before she was a lawyer, and was very keen on bringing back this program. And the other piece of this is the Law Foundation of BC was very keen to bring back this public libraries program. They recognized that it was very cost efficient to get information out to the entire province. There are 240 locations throughout BC, from very, very tiny communities to urban to regional federations. So the program was brought back, and the Law Foundation, it was 2007, and real estate was booming, the interest rates were high, that's where they get their funding, and we were given a large sum of money. So it was just, the timing was great, and we were able to set up a grants program. So
what are some of the things that the Law Matters program has done?
So we were able to build on the experience, beating me along, build on the experience that Legal Services Society had created. And Nancy Hannum, the librarian who was laid off, was then hired as a consultant for Law Matters, which was so wonderful for me. So I got to work with Nancy, and we duplicated a lot of what she'd done, but we were able to expand it immensely. We had a lot of money, and we set up a very robust grants program so that every single library in BC was able to apply for a grant. It was based on population, and the grant was for them to purchase materials to add to their legal information collections. So along with the grant, we provided a recommended list, which now is 280 titles. It's quite extensive. We give them all the ordering information, all of the edition, year, and all of that, and the publisher information, and the price. And then it's geared to the size of library. So we have small, medium, and large, and it's up to it's interesting to me that the tiny, tiny libraries can buy a very sophisticated textbook because they've had questions. So it's up to them. The librarians know the kind of questions they're getting in their community. It's up to them. They get to choose what books they're going to buy. And then along with the grants, we provided training. So we did a large number of in-house workshops, which was a wonderful opportunity to get to meet everybody and to have conversations about the kind of materials you need, the kind of questions you're getting. And the training was designed to introduce them to a range of legal information resources and to get them comfortable using them. How do you find this question? We did a lot of practical problem solving in our workshops. And we would give them support. They can call me, email me anytime and ask, a difficult legal question that they're getting. And over the years, let's see, I have to remember which slide is which. Well, let's just see. Okay, so I have a number of slides that kind of illustrate. So this is a handout of our recommended titles. So it gives you a sense of the topics that we have, and also when you open it, and this is all available online, we have small libraries and small, medium, and then large. And you can get the sense. We start with plain language, the simpler resources, and then it starts to advance the textbooks, the annotated law that they're able to purchase. So the training, which I started to talk about a little bit. And we have a whole variety of training we've been able to do. And a real strong feature of the program when we started was we were very closely linked to the provincial library funding body, which is the Ministry of Education. It had what was called the Public Library, PLSB, Public Libraries. It's changed its name anyway. And they were very linked in with public libraries because they're the funder, And they had consultants who worked in different regions of the province and visited libraries all the time. So they were wonderful for us because they would help publicize the program, they publicized the training, they hosted webinars for us. It was still new for us to get going on webinars. And they had an online certificate course. Now this is community librarians who have not had a graduate degree in library science, but they work in small communities and they're running a library as best they can, and they're able to take a certificate training, which will give them some of the groundwork that you need in running a library. We were able to slot in there and get a legal information sources course. So an 8-week course. It was really a wonderful course because we got to know librarians throughout the province, just online. You know. And that's another thing is that the rural librarians, they don't go to conferences, or, I mean, some of them do, but it's difficult, particularly because they're so often in Vancouver, and it's a long way, it's expensive. So a course like this was really valuable. It was wonderful. Now, this provincial ministry, of course, is going through lots of change, and they're reevaluating and looking, so they've shut down the training program. It's not operating right now, whether it comes back, but it has been a wonderful service. And we started doing webinars ourselves at the courthouse libraries, and we're starting to expand that program. And we continue with our legal reference workshops. We're not doing nearly as many. We do just a couple a year and travel to meet librarians.
Great. And how can I find out more about what all these different projects you've got?
Let's see what slide. Oh, we do have the right slide. How about that? Okay, everything I'm talking about today is available on bclawmatters.ca. So that's the main page. So we have all of our recommended titles. Now our reading list. I have to say, public librarians here, I think it's been mentioned. It's so important. You want to know which ones are out of date. We've had big legislative changes and family law, wills and estates. Oh, they really need to know which books to take out and which to keep in. And we have lawyers on staff who help me with that. I get to consult with great supportive people who help me recommend titles or do the weighting recommendation. All right, so we have a blog of some of our events. The conference materials page, we've had all of the workshops, the webinars are available in the material from today. And I should probably just mention, because it was talked about this morning, the range of topics that we've had. We've had substantive law, so particularly legislative changes, family and wills and estates. We did one on employment law, but really the most popular webinar we've ever done was referrals. How to get off the referral roundabout. We stole that from Australia, but it was really, and we included community workers. So we were able to expand our webinar, and we got over 100 people. And we had a really good discussion on how to do referrals, how to know what's a credible source, where to find referrals, the best referrals. And it was
Are those your community forums that you held?
Not yet.
Okay, all right.
But
it sounds
related.
like the program's expanded from what you originally envisioned.
Yes, and we have evaluation reports, which I think
I do have a question about.
Oh,
look at that. So have you evaluated your program?
We've had quite a few evaluations done on the program as part of the funding requirement. So we did one in 2010, and we did a 2-year reference survey where librarians wrote down the legal topics they were being asked about to inform us about the kind of resources they needed. So it was compared over 2 years to find the top legal topics and how frequently were they getting questions and the kind of referral resources they were likely to use. And so that's been published. And then we did an interesting telephone survey of random, just 20 libraries randomly selected, and asked them a series of questions a few years later. And we got a really good sort of informal feedback about the program and about their needs. And the Law Foundation actually did another evaluation 2 years ago. It hasn't been published. I have to follow up on that because there was another evaluation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And this is just some of the feedback we get. And it's interesting because every year, all the libraries report back on what it is they purchased. And we've asked them, what kind of impact might you be having? And so we get some nice, just informal chit-chat about the way that the public is using the materials and how important the program is to them. And some of them have said, you know, the grants are really great to have. It's always nice to have extra money, but they said, you know, the support, knowing who to call and get help and to get those recommendations on what to buy. They said that's, so yeah, so I'll talk about the future later.
Right, so anything more about other things you've done?
Well, we did start a new program. We were given more money from the Law Foundation a few years after our first start. Again, it was just a great time of funding, which has changed considerably since then. But we added a new program, and these are called Legal Information Community Forums. And now this is an opportunity to, what we do is we support a public library to host an event. And I help them with this. We've written a planning guide and templates of invitations, and we help as much as we can, setting up an invitation list, whatever they need help with. And we invite community groups, anybody in their community that works with legal information. I was just talking to somebody here who's from the registry, I think it's Supreme Court Registry. It's such a bonus if we can get a registry person, and we have a couple of times. Tear people away from their work. But we get a wonderful cross-section of community groups and government offices. And it's an opportunity to network, to talk about the work you do, to ask questions. You know, often we make referrals, but we're not entirely sure what that organization does or if there's been changes. So it's a really nice opportunity. And we also talk about what's missing in your community. It's always legal aid, because there's just not enough. But legal advice is often a big gap. But any legal information that they're missing, how often would they like to have meetings, and that kind of follow-up. It's a wonderful opportunity.
Great. And so can you describe just one highlight from your work with Law Matters that involved a public library? Can you just pick one?
Yeah, I did pick one. Okay, this was a really amazing event. A year ago, there's a community group called NIDIS. And they're a nonprofit. They have like 2 staff. They're so short-staffed. Now in BC, there's been new legislation on, it's called personal planning, but it's also representation agreements. I don't know if you've heard of this. It's kind of an evolution of power of attorney. And what it does is it includes healthcare, financial, everything that you might want someone to be involved in if you lose capacity. So it's broader than power of attorney. And it's been very controversial. And the legislation that was passed is very complicated. It's difficult to understand. But NIDIS is a community group that they are the experts. They have written a lot of tools. Their website has just tons of information. They're extremely good. But they have a hard time getting the word out. They're just so short-staffed. So they asked us if we could help them. And because we have a series of webinars now that we're doing, if they could get in on the webinars. And then they said, wouldn't it be nice if we could get some public libraries to host a webinar for the public? I thought, I've never heard of that. You know, and sometimes webinars can be difficult. They can be glitchy and technology. And I thought, well, what I'm going to do is put the word out there and see if libraries are interested. And we had a combination of in-person talks, presentations in the Lower Mainland. And then throughout the province, any library could sign up. And we had 15 libraries sign up. And I think 8 or 10 did the webinar. And they had amazing, they had 50 people show up.
For a webinar?
For a webinar, to sit in on a webinar. So the public librarian would be the host and manipulate the technology. And type in, like there's virtual chat, so you can type in a question. And then what's nice is that people in the community can chat with each other and the librarian. Librarian can talk about what resources the library has on representation agreements. and help people. So it was quite, it was just a very innovative event. And we had just a total of 400 people around the province. So for this little teeny community group, it was just a success story with public libraries. Quite wonderful.
Wow. Now, I think my next question is, were there any other things that happened with the Law Matters program?
Well, I think the interesting part, which one are you referring to?
I know that, well, I think the Click Law and the Click Law wiki books that we're moving into now, yeah.
So, Law Matters works closely with other programs from courthouse libraries that serve the public. And these all come on stream since 2007. Before then, the public was allowed to come into the library, but there were no real programs. It was just, you do the best you can with lawyers' tools that we have available, and we'll try and help you. But now we've really added to services to the public. So I'm going to describe these in a bit more detail. Website, Wikibooks, Law Matters, and then our reference service. As I explained, we have a toll-free number and an email service the public can use. And public librarians definitely use these services as part of the support. So ClickLaw is a plain language website. So it's similar to Your Legal Rights. So we have a whole number, we have partners in legal information publishing in BC, and they actually manage their resources on our website. They have a back end that they can edit, update, or add anything new. It's not up to us to add them, although we definitely get involved with nudging them sometimes when we know they've got a new resource. So my job has expanded to be, I'm a co-editor on the ClickLaw website. And that's just basically what ClickLaw looks like. A big feature in ClickLaw is a help map. You enter your community and you find all the organizations in your community. So it can be designed and which level you're looking at, whether it's legal advice or counseling in your community. Won't go into a lot of detail. Now, Wikibooks. This is our new innovation. And I love to tell the origin story of ClickLaw Wikibooks. So back in, what year would have been 2011, I was doing all of these workshops for public librarians, and I was always looking for tools that would help explain the law in a reasonable way that would direct you to resources, but would give you some comfort in understanding the topic of law, and then you can then move on from there, but understanding some basics of the law. Now, this guide was written by a rural legal aid lawyer, Cliff Thorsenson's in Merritt. It's cowboy country. And he supervises a legal advocate, very aware of all the questions that a community group is getting, very concerned with resources to rural communities. And that was his title, was Legal Help for Rural BC. But when I saw it, oh, I want this. I really want this for public librarians to add to the training tools. I thought, well, we're serving the whole province, urban, medium, not just rural. So we changed the title and we did an update. It's a couple of years old. Now, the way Cliff Thorsenson wrote the book, he does a nice introduction, just some basic points, a common kind of question. My landlord wants to evict me. So he just goes through a number of points of law. He goes into first steps. Where are you going to get started on this? And that's what public librarians often just want to know, how to get people started. And then after the first steps, you get resources, referrals. So it's all contained on one page, where to go. And I thought that Cliff was such a genius in writing plain language. I found his books so accessible. And
tell us about that too, because tell us a little bit about some of the people that you've worked with who have sort of inspired you over the last few years.
Yeah, well, the lawyers we've worked with have been really amazing. And I'm going to finish with Wikibooks.
Okay.
Sorry, we're jumping around. But when we did this, we were able to get print copies of this guide into every public library in BC. It was extremely popular, and we got a lot of feedback from public librarians on how useful it was. And then we looked at ways to publish this that would be sustainable over time and that we could update easily. And we found this Wikimedia, which is similar to Wikipedia. It's a platform where you can get your material online. You can update it anytime, really easily. I mean, ours is only editors and contributors can edit. And then you can print it off, either as a PDF, you can actually order a bound copy, or you can have an EPUB. You can download it as an EPUB. So this has been a really amazing publishing opportunity, and we've expanded the program. We work with lawyers and community groups, and what they find is it's so much more cost efficient to get their guide onto the Wikimedia. And then they can arrange for printing, and several of these books we've arranged for to be printed to all public libraries. So they get to add to their collections. It's a free book that we send out. And then other community groups have also added to the Wikibooks. And the features, it's to be able to update so easily, and then a public librarian can just download the chapter that day. I can inform them that something. The day we came out with Legal Help for BC, the pardons changed. So the name changed, no longer called pardon, it's called...
Oh, don't ask me. A record suspension.
Record suspension. The day we brought out the book. So we went online, let everyone know, okay, this one's updated. The contents are searchable. It's not like a PDF is locked. You publish a PDF online, nobody knows what's inside. Google doesn't know what's inside of it, but Google can search this entire legal help. Well, this is J.P. Boyd on family law, but it comes up in search results, which really adds to the awareness of the tool. In a variety of formats, we have a Creative Commons copyright, which means anyone can use the material. It has to be attributed, and it has to be at no cost. It has to be free material, same as we've provided it.
So tell us about a couple of the personalities of people that you've met that have inspired you.
We got personalities. The inspiring people I've worked with. So this is Cliff, the Origin Wikibook author, and this is J.P. Boyd, who's our other big star in the Wikibook field. Now, J.P. Boyd has an amazing website called BC Family Law Resource, and it was all his work. It was like thousands of pages, and he's very witty, he's very, very forthright, because he was a single, well, he worked at a firm, but as opposed to Legal Services Society, where you have to be pretty neutral on your guides, but he would have opinions on his website. But he was looking at sustainability, and he's going to be moving on, so who's going to do the website? So we suggested if he wanted to put it all on the Wikimedia, to make it available, and we bring in volunteer lawyers to help edit and update, which we did with Legal Help Guide, Cliff Thorson's book, because he was saying, I'd really like someone to help me update. I'm not an expert in all of these areas, so for the next, we're coming out with a 5th edition, and we have like 11 lawyers in that book, and on JP, I think we've got about 15 lawyers actively working on all the chapters. It's over 800 pages in its base. Phone book, we call it, the yellow phone book. And so we got it to all the public libraries, and the pictures are, they go to their local public library and get a picture taken with the public librarian. So it was a great way to publicize the 2 programs.
Any other lawyers you worked with?
Yeah, so there's some of them. These are just a few. And the J.P. Boyd committee came up with this idea that they would get junior lawyers who are great with technology. They're so comfortable editing online, to senior lawyers who've got the depth of knowledge and experience. But a lot of, I find, senior lawyers do not want to edit online. They send me a Word of the format of a chapter of their edits.
Oh, tell me it's not true.
Well, it's just, you know, they don't have time to learn it. It's just, you gotta learn how to edit and get in there. It's actually very easy, but it's something to get used to. So we have lawyers working together on that. And then J.P. Boyd, again, he's written a manifesto on how to write plain language and how important it is. So we really want that awareness. If you're going to write for the public, it's got to be accessible.
That's right. And is that about it? Anything more that you want to add to this?
Oh, and we have mentioned self-represented litigants, which is a huge concern for the courthouse libraries. Our statistics have gone from, in 2007, it was 30% of our total questions from the public, and last year it's 49%. So we're getting the public coming into our courthouse library in big numbers, and they're almost all self-represented litigants, trying to figure out Supreme Court. I'm astounded at how many people are going to Supreme Court on their own. So there's a lot of self-help guides out there, bits and pieces and areas. So we wanted to put together all the information that we compiled, how to do case law, how to do legislative research, and just get people grounded as a place to start. This is like 3 weeks old. It just got launched.
Wow. So is this work having any impact on people themselves? Last question. The patrons. Last slide. Last slide.
Yeah. Okay. What do we got on the last slide? Oh yeah. Right. Okay, this is so recent. This is last week. We got this survey published. And so the J.P. Boyd is now working for Canadian Research Institute for Law and Family in Calgary. It's affiliated with the University of Calgary Law Faculty. And so they did a very extensive survey. And they were able to get a group of people that could then do follow-up surveys. Like, okay, you got legal information, and it seemed to apply. And then, I forget, it's 3 weeks later, now where are you at? Did that work? Did that information work for you? Do you need more? Are you able to find your follow-up information on our Wikibook, on the J.P. Boyd on Family Law? So it's a really wonderful survey that's now been published. So it's available on the ClickLaw blog, October 22nd.
Well, that's wonderful.
So we got lots of patron, members of the public comments.
Wonderful. Thank you, Janet, for that. I don't know if people have questions or not, but I'm going to just propose something. Sabrina's just going to put up the next slide so I can explain the lunchtime activity. And maybe we'll just have time for a question or two. And it's also quite possible, I think, I know, Janet, that you have a separate meeting with the courthouse librarian starting at 4 when this conference is over. But it may be that somebody wants to host a conversation with you as one of the afternoon conversations to find out more or to share ideas or something like that. So we'll make that possible. Is there a question or two now before we go for lunch that people might like to ask? Jamie?
I'm just curious, when you had the 8-week program, was a big uptake, and why would people, they got a certificate, why would it give somebody an incentive to want to take that course?
Yeah, well, I think when you're serving the public, you get put on the spot. And anything you can do, I think librarians are big on education. They're providing education, but also self-education, because you're always wanting to know as much as you can. And it's true, you're strapped for time, but when something is offered that's structured and it's an opportunity to explore legal questions, like you're given scenarios to research and follow up on, it gives them a way to kind of get grounded in one area of law. And it's a certificate that they can put on their resume, and if they want to advance. In fact, there was a community librarian in Nelson who became, she got the certificate and then she went to library school, but she started as a community librarian. She became head of the BCLA, the Library Association. She's now deputy chief in Burnaby. So she advanced all the way. So I think if you start... Sorry?
Was it popular?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't huge, but I think we had 15 or 20 people the year that I was co-teaching.
Great. And one more quick question.
You talked about the funding for the Grazing program there, but the Wikibooks, how is that funded?
Well, Courthouse Libraries BC takes that mandate very seriously about serving the public and trying innovative things. And we have a CEO who's just very keen on new ideas and trying new things. And it seemed to meet a lot of our objectives in terms of sustainability of a resource that we want to use with public librarians so we could update easily. And it didn't cost that much. I mean, well, you know, I wasn't part of the budget. Someone they said it cost $20,000 to adapt because the Wikimedia is basically free. It's just a downloadable platform, but then you have to adapt it. So I don't remember in the early days of budget. It was just, we were exploring, trying it out. It was just very exciting to try it out.
And it sounds like you leverage in lots of pro bono resources to actually help create the materials, which keeps it really low cost once the platform is there. All right, so I'm going to have to hold that. Oh, Michelle, because I
just want to make one comment. It's not a question, but it's just some information about like the Legal Help for British Columbians, which they've done an amazing job at doing that, and having every library have it, and having it on Wikibooks so it's easily adaptable. I just wanted to mention that in the next weeks and months, Clio is going to be rolling out something called Steps to Justice, which is sort of a similar model in that the information that we have will be on the it will be through the Your Legal Rights site, but it will be, you know, here are common questions that are asked, and then the information, the answers will be in the next steps, in that they'll organize in that way the next steps and then the resources you can use. So Ontario will be soon having something similar.
That's a pretty exciting development. And I'm also realizing, the point of there were 5 different things we wanted to accomplish today, and I think in the morning we've done some of that, but I realized actually sitting here we didn't do all of it. So it was to sort of raise awareness around access to justice, talk about the adverse health impacts or impacts on people when their legal needs are not met, and share information about some of the things that are happening, which we've done. But I actually happen to know that there was more research done in preparation for today's event by Clio and also by Janet on initiatives in other countries, including the US and Australia. And I don't know if people are going to be talking about that over lunch or if somebody wants to host a collaborative conversation to find out more about that, but that information is there too. The other 2 parts of our day were to do more networking and also to actually be able to take action with people on things that we cared about. So that's really what the afternoon is designed to do. So what I'm just going to tell you about now is the part of the day that Kathy is going to be facilitating that will start really at lunchtime, because you can't just eat and network. You also have a little job to do. And I don't know if you want to talk about it, Kathy, or if you want, I've got a bit of information up there on the slide, but why don't you say a few words? And then we're going to let you go for lunch.
Promise. I feel like I wrote down, we filled your head, we need to fill your stomach, and then this afternoon we'll fill your heart, hopefully, with some really great conversations. So that's my hope. So there's a couple things. The network map, we want red lines connecting people now that everybody's on the map. So that's a task that has to be done. You have to think about, is there a collaborative conversation that you want to have in the afternoon? And we're gonna start with a blank agenda, and I'll lead you through this when we get back after lunch. And if you want to host a topic, then we'll give you a space to go do that. If you want to participate in that topic, then we'll group you with like-minded people. We'll have the opportunity to do 2 rounds of that. So there should be lots and lots of time for conversation. If you want to just have the same conversation for the next couple hours, you have the freedom to do that too. So we've got lots of options for you, but we just need to get you fed, and then we need to get you back here around 1:15, and then I'll just lead you in a very quick organizing exercise, and then you have lots of freedom in the afternoon to fill in this terrible blank space in the middle here, so that we're starting to creep in. We're already got lots of ideas, so that's the idea for tomorrow. So lunch is here, and then we'll shoo you back in here for a second, and then spend the afternoon together.
Great, thank you.